They handed me a cardboard box and told me my own bed belonged to someone else now. Before we go any further, if stories about quiet people finally standing up for themselves move you, take 1 second right now and hit that subscribe button. Because what happens in this story, you will not see it coming. And trust me, by the end, you'll want to watch it again just to catch everything you missed the first time. My name is Maren Cole. I'm 37 years old. And for most of my life, I was the daughter nobody worried about. The strong one, the dependable one. The one who always lands on her feet. The one who never gets asked, "Are you okay?" Only, "Can you fix this?" I want you to really sit with that for a second, because if you've ever been that person in your own family, the one everyone calls when something breaks, but no one calls just to talk, then you already know exactly the kind of silence I'm talking about. That Friday started like any other Friday, except it wasn't. That morning, I got a phone call that knocked the wind out of me. My biggest client, the one whose contract made up nearly a quarter of my company's income for the entire year, called to tell me his investor had pulled out. Just like that. The project was dead. A quarter of a year's revenue gone in a 5-minute phone call. I sat in my office for a long time after that call ended. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just sat there, staring at the numbers on my screen, feeling the floor tilt slightly under me. But here's the thing about people like me, the ones who fix things for a living, the ones who've spent years repairing what storms destroy. We don't fall apart when something breaks. We just start calculating how to rebuild it. So I closed my laptop. I told myself, I've rebuilt houses the ocean swallowed whole. I can rebuild a quarter of a year. And then I did what I did every single Friday for the past year and a half. I got in my truck and I drove 3 hours inland. Because 18 months earlier, my father had a heart attack in our driveway. And since that day, I had been splitting my life in 3 hours on the coast, where my real life was, and 3 hours inland, in the town I grew up in, where my family needed me. I drove that line every week, back and forth, coast to inland to coast, like a thread stretched too tight, slowly fraying in the middle. When I pulled up to the house that evening, exhausted, carrying the weight of a terrible morning, I noticed 2 extra cars parked outside. My cousin Theo's truck, and a rusted, dented car that belonged to my sister's boyfriend, Ray. In my family, unexpected company on a Friday evening usually meant one thing. Someone had already made a decision about me, and I was about to be the last person to find out what it was. I took a breath, walked up to the door, and stepped inside. And before I had even closed the door behind me, my sister's voice hit me first. "So, it's true? You got fired." My sister Tasha was curled up on the corner of the couch, phone in hand, barely glancing at me. Ray sat beside her, smirking at his screen. My mother, Diane, sat in her armchair across from them, hands folded. And by the window, our neighbor, Mrs. Patel, sipping sweet tea, pretending she wasn't there for the show. "Laid off," I corrected quietly. "The client's investor pulled out. Nobody fired me." Tasha didn't even register the difference. She turned to our mother, like I wasn't even standing there. "Mom, so, who's going to cover my car payment now?" There it was. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened?" Just a bill, addressed to me. Before I'd even set down my bag. "How do you already know I got laid off?" I asked slowly. Tasha shrugged. "Ray's cousin works at the supply yard. Word travels." So they already knew. Hours ago. And instead of calling me, instead of checking on me, they had gathered in this living room and had a meeting about my paycheck before I had even made it through the door. I drove 3 hours to find out my own family had scheduled a meeting about my money. My mother smiled gently, the kind of gentle that somehow makes things worse. "Now, Maren, don't get worked up. We'll sort it out." You always sort it out. I didn't sit down. And that's when my father, Frank, came down the hallway holding a flattened cardboard box. He didn't even look at me as he set it on the coffee table and popped it open. "Your sister and Ray need a real room," he said. "They're talking about getting married. Makes sense for them to take yours." And then my mother delivered the line. The one I would replay in my head for weeks afterward. The line that, in 3 words, summarized my entire childhood. "Your sister needs this house more than you do, Marin." She said it softly, gently, which somehow made it worse. Tasha didn't even look up from her phone. I followed my father down the hallway, into the room I'd slept in for 18 months, and I watched him fold my work shirts, the same hands that once taught me how to swing a hammer, folding me out of the only space I had left in this house. "You're really doing this?" I asked. "You've always landed on your feet," my mother called from the living room. Like that settled everything. On top of the box sat my grandmother's old sewing tin, the one she gave me when I was 12 years old. I picked it up, held it in both hands for a moment, and then I reached into my jacket pocket. My fingers found a small, cold key ring, one I had never explained to anyone in that house. I didn't explain it now either. "You're not throwing me out," I said quietly. "I'm choosing the door." My father looked up at me, and for just a second, something flickered behind his eyes. Then my mother said, "Don't be dramatic," and he went back to folding. I picked up the box myself, and I walked out of that house before anyone could open the door for me. I shut it behind me, on my own. I drove 3 hours back to the coast that same night, the cardboard box rattling on the seat beside me with every turn in the road. I didn't cry. I was doing math. By the time the road turned to salt air and the lights of my coastal town came up over the dunes, I had already started planning the next 30 days of my life, without realizing just how much that plan was about to change. My apartment sat above an old bait shop, 2 blocks from the water. My office was a converted boathouse a mile down the road, with my name on a hand-painted sign, a sign I paid for myself, with money I earned myself. This was my real life, the one my family never once visited. My business partner, Raina, was still at the office near 10 at night, which wasn't unusual, not on a night when we'd just lost a quarter of our annual revenue. She looked up when I walked in, took one look at the box in my arms, and set down her coffee. "You finally left that house," she said quietly. "They left me," I told her. I just stopped arguing about it. Raina had been telling me for over a year to pull back from that inland house. She'd watched me wire money home every month. She'd watched me drive that highway every weekend and come back a little emptier each time. "Good," she said simply. "So, what do you want to do about it?" I didn't answer right away. I set the box down on my desk, and on top, underneath my grandmother's sewing tin, was a thin folder. One I had kept locked in a drawer at home for 3 years. One I carried back and forth between 2 lives like a secret too heavy to put down. Raina saw me looking at it. "Is it time?" she asked quietly. I wasn't sure yet, but for the first time in 18 months, I felt the line I had been driving back and forth, coast to inland, inland to coast, go slack. Like a rope that had finally been let loose after years of being pulled too tight. Let me take you back further. Because that box didn't come from nowhere. 18 months earlier, my father collapsed in the driveway with a heart attack. I got the call on a job site, dropped everything, and drove 3 hours without stopping. And after that, I just never really left. Someone had to manage the house while he recovered. And in my family, someone had always meant me. My mother had never worked. My sister Tasha drifted between jobs. She usually quit before they could fire her. So I moved back into my childhood bedroom and quietly took on the weight of an entire household. I caught up the property taxes that had quietly fallen behind. I covered a gap in the homeowner's insurance that no one else even noticed. And when Tasha wanted a newer car, one her credit couldn't support on its own, my mother handed me a pen, and I signed. I told myself it was temporary. I even set a condition once. Tasha pays for her own car after 6 months, I said, the day I signed. My mother waved it off without even looking up. She's getting on her feet. She never got on her feet because no one ever let her hit the ground. And me? I was the one who never needed catching, which, in that house, was just another way of saying I was the one nobody ever thought about. I drove that highway every Friday and told myself family was worth it. I believed that right up until the night they handed me a box. People who hear this story always ask me the same question. Why does your mother love your sister more? It isn't that simple. And I won't pretend it is. Between Tasha and me, My mother lost 2 pregnancies. She never talks about it. My grandmother told me years ago, quietly, almost like a confession. 2 pregnancies that ended before they began, and then Tasha arrived. Small, early, breathing against the odds. My mother decided, somewhere in that hospital room, that this child would never want for anything as long as she lived. She built her entire identity around keeping Tasha safe, close, protected. And somewhere in there, she decided I was the strong one. The one who didn't need worrying over. I understand where it came from. Understanding it never made it hurt less. My father came from his own kind of wreckage. His father was a loud, hard man, and my dad learned early that peace meant agreeing with whoever raised their voice the loudest. In our house, that was always my mother. So he kept his head down. He folded shirts when he was told to. The only person who ever truly saw me was my grandmother, Lucille. She used to pull me close when I was small and whisper, "You were never the strong one to me, baby. You were just the only one who showed up." She was living in the back bedroom of that house now, 80 years old next month. Her entire world reduced to a recliner and a window. She had lost the one place she ever truly loved a long time ago, and losing it had folded something inside her. I think that's the real reason I drove that highway for 18 months. Not for my mother. For the old woman in the back room, who remembered my name when no one else bothered. That first night back on the coast, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with cold coffee and my laptop, and I started pulling threads, quietly, methodically, the way I'd take apart a wall I knew was rotten underneath. First, the property taxes on the inland house. Autopay, set up for my account. 2 clicks. Cancelled. Then the homeowner's insurance. Same account. Same 2 clicks. Cancelled. Then Tasha's car. I had quietly been covering those payments for months while she believed, or pretended to believe, that she was paying it herself. I logged in and I stopped it. I knew a cosigner can't just disappear from a loan overnight. The only clean way off was for Tasha to refinance in her own name, and we both knew she'd never qualify. So I did the only honest thing I could. I stopped covering it, and I told her plainly. The payments were hers now. If she let it default, it would hurt my credit too, but I decided I could carry one bruise to be free of a 15-year tab. Then I made a list. Every single thing I had quietly been holding up for that house for 15 years. And one by one, I drew a line through each item. It took less than an hour. They threw me out at sunset. By midnight, the floor beneath them had already started to shift. And they had no idea yet. I want to pause here for a moment, because people often tell me I was cold that night. Maybe I was. But I had spent 18 months being warm inside a house that saved all of its warmth for someone else. If you've ever been the wall a family leaned on until you cracked, you already know exactly what I felt, driving away that night. For 2 days, the inland house went completely silent. No call from my mother. No message from my father. My sister posted a photo of my old bedroom online with a caption about finally getting some space. I didn't respond. Instead, I threw myself into work because that's what I do with a wound. I bury it under a task list. Raina and I went after smaller jobs to fill the hole that lost contract had left behind. A storm-damaged duplex. A widow's porch, one strong wind away from collapsing. Honest work. Work that paid on time. On the 3rd morning, my cousin Theo called. Theo was the only person in that family who had ever told me the truth without me having to ask for it. "Hey," he said carefully. "Thought you should know. A letter came to the house. Bank letterhead. Your mom's been staring at it all morning. She looks scared." "What kind of letter?" "Something about a home equity line. She kept asking your dad what it meant. He didn't know either." I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. "What home equity line, Theo?" He went quiet for a moment. "You don't know about it?"
"What?
"Home equity line. I figured you set it up. It's got," he paused. "Look, I shouldn't be the one telling you this, but your name is mixed up in it. Somehow." I thanked him and hung up and sat very, very still. There was a piece of this story I didn't have yet. And, apparently, it had my name on it. That afternoon, my sister called. I almost let it ring. But some old reflex, the one that still hoped, somewhere deep down, that someone might ask how I was doing, made me pick up. "Hey," Tasha said breezily. "So my insurance is due Monday. Can you cover it? And Mom says the water heater's making a weird noise, so probably that too." "No hello?" I asked. "No question that doesn't end in a dollar amount." "Marin, do you know where I am right now? The beach somewhere? I'm 3 hours away, and I'm off your payroll." A pause. I could hear Ray in the background, saying something low. "Don't be like that," Tasha said. "You always handle this stuff." "I handled it because nobody else would. That doesn't mean it was ever mine to handle." "So, you're just going to let my car get repossessed? Over what? Your feelings?" I almost laughed. "I'm not your bank, Tasha. I was never supposed to be." And then, in the background, I heard Ray's voice, clearer this time. "Ask her about the other thing," he said. And Tasha shushed him, fast. But I'd already heard it. "The other thing?" I asked slowly. "What other thing?" "Nothing," Tasha said, too quickly. "Forget it." And she hung up. I sat there with the phone in my hand for a long time. There was a script in that family, and I had been playing my role in it for 15 years. The dependable one. The open wallet. The wall. And now that I had quietly walked off the set, they were all confused that their lines weren't landing the way they used to. The problem was, somebody had written me into a role I had never agreed to. And Ray had just let the page slip. That night, I sent a message. The kind of message I send a client when there's nothing left to negotiate. Short. Clear. Final. To all three of them, at once. The taxes, the insurance, the car cosign. Done as of now. I gave them a clean date, the bank's contact information, and nothing else. No apology. No paragraph explaining how much it hurt. Before I sent it, I wrote one more line for myself, more than for them. Family isn't a bill. It's a door. And I'm done holding it open for people who only knock when they want something. I didn't send that part. I just needed to read it back once in my own handwriting to believe it. Then I hit send on the rest and turned my phone face down. The storm hit by noon the next day. My mother called 6 times before I answered. And when I finally did, she didn't lead with the money. She led with the knife. "After everything this family has done for you," she said, "this is who you've become?" And what exactly has this family done for me, Mom? Silence. She didn't have a list. There wasn't one. "You've always landed on your feet, Marin," she said, falling back on the old refrain. "You don't need us the way your sister does. Why are you doing this to her?" "I'm not doing anything to Tasha," I said quietly. "I stopped doing things for her. That's not the same thing. She could lose her car, then she can make her payments, the way adults do." Her voice cracked, right on cue. Tears she could summon like turning on a tap. "I lost 2 babies, Marin. You don't understand what it is to almost lose a child." It was the one true thing she'd ever said to me, and she used it like a weapon, the way she always had. "I do understand, Mom," I said softly. "I've understood it my whole life. That's why I drove that highway for 18 months. But grief isn't a bill I owe forever." Silence again. And then she said something that told me exactly where this conversation was headed. "We'll just plan your grandmother's birthday without you then. Nana's 80th. And just like that, my mother had turned my grandmother's birthday into a battlefield. I hung up the phone, sat there for a long moment, and a plan I had been too afraid to make for 3 years quietly began to take shape. 2 days later, I drove back inland. But not for my mother. I went in through the side door, the one near the back bedroom, so I wouldn't have to pass through the living room. My grandmother, Lucille, was in her recliner by the window, a quilt over her knees, looking smaller than I remembered. Her face lit up the moment she saw me, the way it always did, like I was the only weather she cared about. "There's my girl," she said. I pulled a chair close and held her hand. The skin felt thin as paper now. We talked about small things. The birds at her feeder. A show she liked. And then she went quiet, looking out at the gray sky. 80 years old, she said softly. "Can you believe it?" "What do you want for it?" I asked. "For the birthday." She smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I had one good house in my whole life," she said. "Out on the water. Your grandfather and I bought it the year we married. We lost it when the bad years came. She squeezed my hand. The sea took everything else from me, but that porch. I used to watch the sun go down from there and think, this is mine. Nobody can take this. She laughed quietly. Funny what a person remembers at the end. I didn't tell her what I knew. Not yet. I just sat with her until the light changed. And on the drive back to the coast that evening, I made a call to my attorney about a document I had been thinking about for 3 years and had never been brave enough to finally draw up. Here's the part of this story I haven't told anyone, not even Raina, not fully, until much later. The house my grandmother lost is the house I bought back. 3 years ago, it came up at a county auction. Half ruined, the porch sagging into the sand. I emptied my entire savings account and took it. I told no one. Not Tasha. Not my mother. Not my father. For 3 years, I worked on that house every weekend that I wasn't driving inland. Slowly. Quietly. Piece by piece. By the 3rd year, I had finally reached the bones of the place, the original interior walls, untouched since my grandparents built that house. Every owner since had only ever done surface work. Paint. Cheap fixtures. The easy things. Not one of them had ever opened the walls. The day after I sat with Nana, I drove up the coast to work because tearing into rotted wood is the only thing that calms me when my chest feels tight. I was prying open a sealed section of wall beside the old chimney, lath and horsehair plaster, untouched for 70 years, when something dropped out of the cavity and hit the subfloor with a soft thud. A rusted coffee tin. The kind they don't make anymore. I sat down right there on the subfloor and pried it open. Inside were photographs, curled, yellowed with age. My grandmother, young. My grandfather, his arm around her, the porch behind them, new and white. And underneath the photographs, a sheet of paper, folded into a small, hard square, soft from decades of being handled. Her handwriting. A list titled simply, Things I Want Before I Go. Most of it was small. See the cousins once more. Make peace with Frank. And at the very top, underlined twice, so hard the pen had nearly torn through the paper. Watch one more sunset from the porch of a house that's mine. She had sealed that tin inside the wall the year they built the house, and it had waited there, in the dark, through the foreclosure, through every owner after them, through the long, slow ruin, because not one of them had ever gone down to the bones of the house. Until I did. I sat on that floor until the light went orange through the salt-streaked window. Then I folded the list back into the tin, and I knew exactly what I was going to do, and exactly where. I called my attorney from the porch that evening, sitting on the new boards I had laid myself, the ocean going dark in front of me. I want to set up a life estate, I told her. My grandmother, she lives in this house for the rest of her life. No rent, no conditions. I keep ownership. But the right to live here, the right to that sunset, that's hers, until she's gone. It was clean. It was legal. And it was entirely mine to give. I'd bought this house with my own 2 hands and a decade of grinding. No one had handed it to me. And now I was going to hand the best of it to the one person who had ever truly handed me anything. I would throw Nana her 80th birthday right here, on this porch, in the house she lost and never knew she'd gotten back. I would watch her face when she realized where she was. And the family that had packed my shirts into a cardboard box could find out the same way everyone else did. I started planning that night. The caterer. The chairs. A string of lights along the eaves. Raina thought I'd completely lost my mind. You're throwing a party, she said slowly, for the people who threw you out? I'm throwing a party for my grandmother, I corrected. They're just going to be there for it. My phone buzzed while we were talking. A new booking inquiry had come through our company's website, through the listing where we occasionally rented out the restored cottage for small private events. Someone wanted to book it for a family party. I almost didn't look at the name. When I did, I had to read it twice. Diane Cole. I sat there, staring at my screen. My mother wanted to rent a beach house for my grandmother's 80th birthday. She had gone looking online for somewhere that would look good in front of the cousins and the church friends. And the algorithm had handed her my cottage. She had no idea it was mine. She didn't even recognize it as her own mother's lost house. The listing photos showed it fully restored, transformed, nothing like the ruin the family remembered. Raina read the screen over my shoulder and let out a slow whistle. She's trying to rent your house to throw a party you're already throwing. In the house her own mother lost, that she doesn't know you own. That's exactly it, I said. We sat with that for a long moment. It was almost too perfect, the kind of thing you couldn't write if you tried. My mother, who had told me my sister needed a house more than I did, was now trying to pay me to use a house she had no idea was mine. There was a version of this where I exposed it right then. Fired back a message. You can't rent what I own. Watched her squirm over text. But text is small. And what my mother had done to me hadn't been small, and it hadn't been done in private. She had packed me out of that house in front of a neighbor, with witnesses on full display. So, I decided I wasn't going to settle this in a private message either. I was going to settle it the way she had, out loud in front of people with witnesses. Not a scream, not a scene, just the truth, in a room full of people, where she couldn't quietly spin it into a story where she was the victim. Don't answer it yet, I told Raina. Let me think about how I want this to go. I already knew. I just needed to be sure I had the stomach for it. Before I could plan further, Theo called again, and this time, his voice was tight. I found out what the bank letter's about, he said. You're not going to like it. 2 years earlier, it turned out my mother had taken out a home equity line against the inland house to fund Tasha and Ray. Their truck. Some business idea of his. The wedding they kept talking about. And because my mother's own credit was too thin to qualify on her own, she had used the only strong name attached to that house. Mine. She had kept copies of everything from when I co-signed Tasha's car, my social security number, my income records, my old signature. And she had used all of it to forge my name onto a home equity application. I never saw it. I never signed it. But on that paper, I was a borrower. The line was now delinquent. The house was collateral. And my name was on the hook for all of it. Here's the part that I've turned over in my head 100 times since. A year earlier, a strange letter had arrived addressed to me, at the inland house. Something from a lender I didn't recognize. I asked my mother about it. She said it was junk mail, a pre-approval offer, nothing important. I called the number anyway, got a runaround. When I tried to have my name removed from whatever it was, they told me the account holder needed to come in and sign. And the account holder was my mother. She never went. I had smelled smoke and reached for the alarm. And the door had been locked from a side I couldn't reach. I sat with the phone in my hand and felt the entire shape of it settle into place. The house I'd been kept out of had been standing on my name the whole time. I didn't panic. Panic is for people who don't understand how a foundation works. I called my attorney the next morning, and we went at it the way I approach any rotten structure, methodically from the bottom up. We pulled the loan documents. We laid the forged signature beside my real one, and the difference was obvious, once you knew to look for it. We cross-checked the dates on the application against where I had actually been, job sites, timestamps, receipts. Then we did the unglamorous, necessary things. A written fraud dispute to the lender. An identity theft affidavit. A police report filed in the county where the loan originated. My attorney was blunt with me. This is a strong fraud claim, but the bank has to open an investigation, and that can take months. They won't just transfer the debt to whoever actually spent the money. What we're doing right now is disputing whether you're liable at all. If the forgery holds up, you come off the loan entirely, and the bank goes after whoever actually signed it. I sat with that, naming my mother, putting it in writing, formally, that she had forged my signature onto a loan. A year earlier, I would have flinched. I would have quietly eaten the debt to keep the peace, the way I always had. Not this time. File all of it, I said. So we did. Slow, careful, uncertain work, but the only kind of fight I trust, because it can't be argued away with tears. My mother was going to get a very different kind of letter soon. One that said the account was under a fraud investigation. And the daughter she had thrown out was no longer quietly carrying it. I didn't gloat. I just filed each document and I slept fine. There's a particular kind of peace that comes from finally fixing the right thing, instead of the thing everyone always expected you to fix. Then I made my move on the party. I had Raina respond to my mother's booking request from our company account, under the business name, with my name nowhere on it. The cottage was confirmed for her date. The message said the event coordinator would handle all the details. My mother, delighted to have found somewhere that photographed well, paid the deposit without a second look. She never asked who owned it. People like my mother don't ask who's holding the thing up. They just enjoy standing on it. So now the entire family was coming to the coast, to my house, to celebrate Nana's 80th birthday. And not one of them knew whose porch they'd be standing on. I let them book it. I just didn't tell them whose it was. You're really going to let them set up a party in your house? Raina asked slowly, thinking it's some random rental? I'm going to let them walk in, I said, believing my mother arranged something beautiful. And then I'm going to tell the truth, in front of everyone who matters to her. That was the whole shape of it. My mother dealt in shame done in public. The box. The neighbor. The meeting behind my back, before I'd even walked through the door. So I would answer with truth, also done in public. I spent the next 2 weeks finishing the cottage. A new porch rail. Fresh white paint. A small wooden sign I carved myself, hung by the door, though I kept it covered for now. The party was set. Nana didn't know. My mother didn't know. The only people who knew the full truth were me, Raina, and a lawyer drawing up a deed. My father called the week before the party. He never calls. Marin, he said, and then a long, heavy silence, the kind he fills a room with. I know that night wasn't right. The box. I shouldn't have packed your things. I waited. I had waited 18 months for him to say one true sentence. I wasn't going to rush him now. Your mother said it was best for everyone, he went on. I went along. I always go along. That's the thing about me, I guess. It is the thing about you, Dad, I said. Not cruel. Just true. He breathed out slowly. There's a letter about the loan. Your mother won't tell me what's in it. I closed my eyes. Ask her, Dad. It's her loan. She says it's got your name on it. It does. She put it there. Without asking me. Silence. Long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. I didn't know, he said finally. I believe you, I told him. You never know anything in that house. You make sure of it. It was a hard thing to say to my own father, but he had earned the hearing of it. Are you coming to your grandmother's birthday? He asked. I'm coming, I said. More than you know. I didn't explain. He wasn't ready. And honestly, neither was I. But I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a small, open window, where a man who had spent his whole life folding shirts and keeping his head down might, just once, choose to stand up straight. I hung up and went back to sanding the porch rail. And I let myself hope, just a little. Hope is cheaper than disappointment. And I had room for it. The consequences I had set in motion kept landing back inland, that whole week, and Theo narrated all of it to me, whether I asked him to or not. The car went first. A tow truck came on a Tuesday afternoon and took Tasha's SUV right out of the driveway while she stood in the doorway in her robe, screaming at a man holding a clipboard who'd clearly heard worse before. 2 months behind, with no one quietly covering it anymore. She had to ride everywhere with my mother now, like a teenager again. Then the home equity notices started arriving in earnest. With the account now under a fraud dispute, and my name no longer the silent name behind it, the lender's letters landed squarely on my parents. The bank's fraud unit started asking my mother questions she had no answers for. The bank wanted payment they didn't have. My mother called Theo, crying about what Marin did to us. And Theo, bless him, said, Aunt Diane, Marin didn't take out that loan. She hung up on him. Ray, sensing the money drying up, started spending less time around the house. The wedding talk went quiet. I felt something complicated, watching all of it unfold from 3 hours away. Not joy, exactly. More like watching a building you'd warned everyone about finally settle, exactly the way you said it would. I hadn't pushed it over. I had just stopped standing where the wall used to be. You doing okay with all this? Theo asked me one evening. I'm fine, I said, and then caught myself because that word had been used against me my whole life. Actually, I said, I'm better than fine. For the first time in a long time, the thing falling apart isn't me. Theo laughed low. Save me a seat at the party. Front row. You're one of the few who's earned it, I told him. I could have called my mother and explained everything, the loan, the house, the party. I didn't. Some people only hear you when the quiet gets loud enough to cost them something. If you've ever gone quiet on purpose, on someone who never gave you a reason to stay loud, you already know exactly what I mean. The last week before the party, I more or less lived at the cottage. I finished the porch, washed the windows until the salt was gone, and the glass took the light clean. Raina strung lights along the eaves. The caterer confirmed. I had a cake made lemon because that was Nana's favorite. The carved sign by the door stayed covered with cloth, waiting. The cottage didn't look like the ruin the family remembered, and it didn't look like a rental either. It looked like a home that had been loved back to life. Because it was. I stood on that porch the night before the party and watched the sun go down over the water, exactly the way Nana had written she wanted to. I tried to picture her face seeing it for the first time. I'd brought the coffee tin with me. I set it on the mantel inside, the photographs propped beside it, the list folded back inside, exactly where she'd left it 50 years ago. Some part of me wanted her to find it herself. The deed sat in a folder in my truck, signed, witnessed, the life estate drawn up clean. Everything was ready. My mother thought she'd rented a pretty venue. My sister thought she was attending a party. The cousins were driving in from 3 counties. And not one of them knew that the house they were about to celebrate and had been bought back from the wreckage by the daughter they'd packed into a box, or that the woman of honor was about to be handed the one thing she had written down and hidden in a wall 50 years ago. I slept at the cottage that night. I woke before dawn, to the sound of the tide, steady, certain. And I was not afraid. My mother called the morning of the party. And this time, her performance had cracks in it. The bank is threatening to take the house, Marin. Her voice shook. They say the loan's in default. They say you filed some kind of fraud claim against it. You have to fix this. You have to help us. I didn't take out that loan, Mom. I did it for your sister. For the family. You did it without asking me. And now you want me to pay for it. A long silence. Then she said the thing she always said, like a coin she kept flipping because it had always landed in her favor. You've always landed on your feet, Marin. You can take this. We can't. I let the line sit empty for a moment. I'll see you at the party, Mom, I said quietly. I think you'll find it's really something. She didn't catch the weight in those words. She was too busy being afraid, and certain that I was the cruel one. At least you're showing up for your grandmother, she snapped, and there was the knife again, the implication that I had ever, once, not shown up. I hung up, finished loading the truck, the cake, the folder with the deed, the cloth-covered sign, and drove the 40 minutes up the coast with the windows down and salt in my hair. I felt steadier than I had in years. Today, the truth was finally going to stand up in a room and be counted. I arrived 2 hours early to walk through the cottage one last time. The caterers were setting tables on the lawn that ran down toward the dunes. The lights waited for dusk. Inside, the photographs stood on the mantel beside the coffee tin. I checked the deed in its folder. The life estate clipped behind it, my grandmother's full name typed clean across the top. Raina found me on the porch. You sure about doing this in front of everyone? She asked quietly. They could make it ugly. They already made it ugly, I said. In a living room, in front of a neighbor with a cardboard box. I'm just answering it in the same room they started the conversation in. She nodded slowly. What's the plan? No plan. No speech. I let my mother do what she does, take credit, perform for the cousins. And when she's standing right in the middle of it, sure she's won. I'll tell them the truth. Then I'll give Nana the porch. And the family? They find out today that they're guests, I said. Not owners. Not heirs. Guests because Nana loves them, and it's her day. But the door I've been holding open with my own back for 15 years? That closes today. I wasn't angry saying it. That's the part people never quite believe. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't rehearsing cutting lines in my head. I was calm, the way the tide is calm. The way something is calm when it knows it's going to happen, no matter what stands in the way. The cars started arriving a little after 4. I heard them on the gravel. Doors slamming, voices carrying up to the porch. I smoothed my shirt, picked up the folder, and went to greet my grandmother. Everyone else could wait. They wheeled Nana up the gravel path in a borrowed chair, a shawl around her shoulders. I watched her face the entire way. She was looking at the cottage, the way you look at a word you can't quite remember. Then the porch came fully into view. The white rail, the lights, the windows, clean and shining. She stopped. Her hand came up to her mouth. "Frank," she said softly to my father, who was pushing the chair. "Frank, this is—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The cousins kept moving past her toward the food, not understanding. But my father went still. He'd grown up visiting this porch. He looked at the house, and then slowly he looked at me, standing at the top of the steps. And something crossed his face I had never seen there before. My mother breezed up the path in her good dress, already smiling for the cousins, already playing the hostess. "Isn't it lovely, Mama?" she called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I found it for you. I wanted you to have somewhere beautiful." A few people clapped. Nana wasn't listening to her anymore. She was staring at the small wooden sign by the door, the one I had carved myself and uncovered that morning. Lucille's porch. Her own name. Weathered cedar. As if it had always been there. "Who did this?" she whispered. "Who brought my house back?" The party noise rolled on around us. Cousins laughing, ice clinking in glasses, the caterer calling something about the cake. But in that small pocket of porch, 3 people stood frozen. My grandmother, hand over her mouth. My father, gone pale. And my mother just beginning, just barely, to sense that the script in her head and the room she was actually standing in were not the same place. "Mama," my mother said again, less certain now. "I rented it for you." And that was the moment I'd been waiting for. I came down the steps. My mother, rattled but recovering fast, did what she always does. She filled the silence with herself. She turned to the cousins, the church friends, Aunt Ratha, the whole gathered crowd, and raised her voice into the role she loved best. The generous one. The one who made things happen. "I wanted Mama's 80th to be special," she announced. "So, I found this gorgeous place right on the water. Wasn't easy, let me tell you. But nothing's too good for my mother." A few people clapped again. Tasha, standing near the cooler with Ray, smiled like the praise was partly hers. My mother was glowing now, the fear from that morning's phone call buried under the warmth of an audience. This was her medicine. To be seen as the one who provides, who arranges, who gives. The same woman who had told me, just weeks ago, that my sister needed a house more than I did was now taking a bow in a house she had no idea I owned. 3 months of planning, she went on, warming up. I just wanted somewhere that felt like family. Nana was still staring at the sign. My father hadn't moved. Theo, off to the side, caught my eye and gave the smallest nod, like a man bracing for a wave he could already see coming. I let my mother have her moment. I let it grow. I let her gather the whole crowd into the story she was telling. Let her stand at the very center of it, certain she had won. Certain she was the hero of her own mother's birthday. Then, when she paused, letting the admiration settle, I stepped into the middle of the lawn, where everyone could see me, and I said, in a voice that didn't need to be loud at all, "Mom, you didn't rent this house." The lawn went quiet, the way a beach goes quiet, right before the water pulls back. My mother turned to me, the smile still on her face, but losing its grip at the corners. "What do you mean?" "Of course I paid the deposit." "The company you booked through," I said evenly, "is mine."
Titline.
"The one you found online. The one you paid. That's my company, Mom. And this is my house." Nobody moved. The cousins looked from her to me and back again, sensing they'd walked into the middle of something none of them fully understood yet. "I bought this house 3 years ago," I said, calm, steady, letting each fact land on its own weight. "At a county auction. The same house Nana and Grandpa lost years ago when the bad years came. It was a ruin. I emptied my savings and I bought it. I've been rebuilding it with my own hands every weekend since. On the weekends you all thought I was just out at a job site. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. That's not. You were construction, she said, as if that was somehow a rebuttal. I own a restoration company, I said quietly. I've owned it for years. You never asked. None of you ever asked what I actually did, because you only ever wanted to know what I could do for you. And then my mother did what she always does when the ground shifts under her. She exploded. You bought our family's house and you hid it. Her voice rose, the performance for the cousins forgotten, her face going red. You let me make a fool of myself. After everything, after we took you in, after we raised you, this is your revenge. The cousins watched her come apart. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The louder she got, the smaller her story became. It's not revenge, Mom, I said quietly. It's the truth. And it's about time it stood up in a room you couldn't talk it out of. I walked over to my grandmother's chair and crouched down beside her, the folder in my hand. The whole lawn was watching now. Nana, I said softly, I brought your house back. And I'm not just giving it to you for today. I opened the folder and showed her the deed, her name, typed clean, across the top of the life estate. This says you live here for the rest of your life. No rent. No conditions. The sun set off that porch, it's yours. Exactly the way you wrote it down. The way you hid it in the wall 50 years ago for me to find. Her hands were shaking as she took the paper. She read it. Then she read it again. And then she pressed it to her chest and made a sound I had never heard from her before. Half a laugh and half a sob. My house, she whispered. My own house. Behind me, my mother found her voice again. You can't just, we're family. That house should. She couldn't even finish the sentence. The entitlement was so naked, it embarrassed even the cousins standing nearby. You've always landed on your feet, Marin. My mother tried again. The old coin, flipped one more desperate time. I stood and looked at her and let her see, really see, that the coin didn't work on me anymore. I did land on my feet, I said. Right here. On the porch you packed me away from. The lawn was silent. You told me my sister needed a house more than I did, I said. You were wrong about which house. And wrong about which person. Nana needed this one more than this family ever did. My mother's mouth worked, but nothing came out. And my grandmother, in her chair, clutching the deed to her chest, lifted her head and looked at her own daughter, and said, in a voice thin, but clear enough for every single cousin on that lawn to hear, Diane, hush. The girl gave me my porch back. Let her have her say. For the first time in my entire life, my mother had nothing left to say. The whole carefully built facade came down, right there on the lawn, in front of everyone she had wanted to impress. Aunt Ratha asked too loudly, Diane, what's this about a loan on the house? My mother flinched like she'd been slapped, because of course, the family grapevine had already carried that part too. The cousins started murmuring among themselves. Tasha, sensing the wind change, tried to pivot. This is so unfair. You're embarrassing us at Nana's party. I'm not embarrassing anyone, I said evenly. I'm telling the truth at it. There's a difference. You'd be surprised how often those two get confused in this family. Ray had already drifted toward the parking area, suddenly very interested in his phone, the way men like Ray do when the free ride finally runs out. And then my father moved. Frank, who had spent 63 years keeping his head down, folding shirts when he was told to, walked past my mother. He walked to my grandmother's chair and put his hand gently on her shoulder. And he looked at me and said, his voice rough, She's right. Marin's right. About all of it. It wasn't much. It came 30 years too late. But my mother turned to him like he had just betrayed her, and for the first time in his life, he didn't look away. Diane, he said quietly. Enough. It was the first time I had ever heard my father tell my mother enough. The party didn't so much end as quietly dissolve. The cousins drifted toward the cake, unsure where to look. Aunt Ratha kept asking my mother pointed questions she had no answers for. And I stood beside my grandmother's chair, my father's hand resting near mine on the back of it, and the three of us looked out at the water, while, behind us, the family I had carried for 15 years quietly came apart under its own weight. The crowd thinned by evening. The cousins left in twos and threes, some of them stopping to squeeze my hand on their way to their cars, a few of them looking at my mother very differently than they had when they arrived. Tasha left with Ray, then came back 10 minutes later, because he had driven off without her. She didn't apologize, but she sat on the porch steps for a while, quiet, watching the water. And, before she finally left with my parents, she said one true thing. I didn't know about the loan. It wasn't much, but it was the first true thing she'd said to me in years. My parents drove back inland that night, to a house they'd now have to save on their own, with their own names and their own money. The home equity dispute would grind on for months, and nothing about it was guaranteed. But I had stopped quietly carrying it. And whatever they had actually signed for, they would now answer for themselves. I stayed behind with Nana. When the last car crunched out of the gravel, I wheeled her chair to the edge of the porch, and we sat together as the sun went down over the water, gold spilling slowly across the whole bay. She held the deed in her lap the entire time. First sunset, that's all mine, she said softly. Took 80 years. It's yours now, I told her. Every one of them, from here on. She reached over, found my hand, and we watched the light go down together. Neither of us said anything else. Nothing else needed saying. In the months that followed, I kept the cottage, and Nana lived there. I drove up most weekends, the way I used to drive to the inland house. Except now, the highway led towards someone who was glad to see me, instead of someone who needed something from me. Titaline recovered. We landed 2 new contracts by fall, and the hole that Lost Resort contract left filled back in board by board. The way holes do, when you keep working. My mother and I didn't speak for a long while. I didn't slam that door. I just stopped holding it open with my back. My father called, sometimes short, careful calls. And once, he drove out to the coast alone, and sat on the porch with Nana and me, and didn't say much. Which, from him, was a whole speech. People still ask me if I feel guilty, cutting my family off the way I did. I tell them what I finally understand now. Family isn't a bill you owe forever. It's a door. And I'm done holding it open for people who only knock when they want something. The ones who knock because they love you, you'll always let in. The rest can learn to carry their own roof. I spent 15 years being the wall. Turns out, I make a much better porch. If there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this. Setting a boundary isn't slamming a door on the people you love. It's finally deciding who gets a key. That's my story. 1 layoff. 1 cardboard box of folded shirts. And a porch a family tried to take from a woman who had already bought it back. If this reminded you that your kindness isn't a debt you owe forever, take that as your sign. Give yourself the key first. By the way, where are you watching this story from? Let us know in the comments, because it's amazing to see how far these stories travel around the world. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might be the one you needed most.